This is episode 213 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I am Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
This is New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it's been another eventful week here this summer in New Mexico politics and political discussions. We kind of knew that New Mexico would be on the cusp of less freedom, more of a lockdown due to the numbers that the governor is using to determine her policies regarding opening or closing New Mexico. And that was from, over the 4th of July weekend. I guess on July 1st, she had her first round of reductions in the openness of New Mexico's economy. She followed that up with a bombshell here last week. And now, as we record this, restaurants are no longer permitted indoor dining. And there's also some other reductions in freedoms, including out-of-state people going to our state parks. So very heavy stuff here, and a lot of anxiety, protest, argument, animosity. It's just getting ugly out there.
Yeah, it really is. And, you can see why. People are, literally fighting for their livelihoods. These restaurants, they were shut down the first time. They got PPP, payroll protection loans. They did what they could to survive. And they came back with 50% opening, and things were going okay for them. Now, I've talked to a lot of restaurateurs and heard from a lot. None of them were raking in the dough at this 50% opening, but they were managing to make a little margin, maybe lose less money than they would have been if they would have been closed. And then to have this thing go the other way, it's quite a shock. And I've said it many times, I'll probably say it many more, is that, the goal is to flatten the curve so that the healthcare system isn't overwhelmed with this COVID. But you can kill the economy, and just to be sure, to be clear, the economy is not this optional thing. The economy is that by which people earn their living, they buy food, they provide services to other people like food, shelter, clothing, and the like. And so, yeah, there are a lot of frayed tempers, frayed nerves right now with regard to what's going on here in New Mexico.
Yeah, that is to say the least. As we kicked off earlier today, this is Monday, recording this podcast, the Restaurant Association had a protest meeting, a virtual protest online. Some restaurants in especially the southeastern part of the state are defying the order by the governor head on. They announced that they're not obeying, and they're not alone. There's a number of them. Some of them more publicly, some of them perhaps more privately are disobeying the governor. But this is kind of where we've come to. And, again, the governor in her press conference did not say, we have all kinds of evidence, or any evidence, to be clear, that this is the cause. This is the issue, that restaurants being open indoors is creating the additional spread of the coronavirus that she has decried. Rather, it was New Mexicans disobeyed my orders, and New Mexicans are causing this situation. So it seems a little bit like we are being naughty little children here, and our mother is spanking us and giving us less freedom than we had before.
Yeah, there is certainly. I've watched a few. I can only take so many, but I've watched a few of her briefings that are on Facebook Live, and there's very much of a shaking a finger, and it's always, interestingly to me, and this just shows how different my perspective is. It's always everything we possibly can do to constrain infections from the virus. And believe me, that's an important thing. But taken to its illogical extremes, which we may be well getting back too close to that, we get to that thing that there for a while you weren't even allowed to say that the cure is worse than the disease. And so weird to that. We've already seen a lot of statistics out there about suicide, about, just tragedies happening. We see that people aren't getting regular health care unrelated to COVID because of the way the healthcare system's being operated in panic. And so, this is an economy and a state and a country is a thing that has a lot of moving pieces and parts. And that if we just keep looking at that one, maybe we will reduce infections, although it doesn't seem like that's been working out very well. But they certainly have done a good job of destroying jobs, destroying economic activity, and hurting people's livelihoods. And to be clear, this isn't this abstract thing like for a restaurant or any business. If you can't operate and that business lays people off, people lose their jobs, businesses go bankrupt, services can no longer be provided. So it is a very difficult situation, and not like we've said, to put it mildly, not everyone's happy with how it's being handled.
Yeah. On Twitter, just a little bit ago, I received a note from one of my followers and friends on Twitter that La Peep, kind of an institution here in Albuquerque, had kind of grown. They are predominantly known as a restaurant that caters to the breakfast crowd. As people don't go into the office, I'm sure they are suffering mightily. But I understand that all of the La Peep locations are going to close. Now, that's not been verified by the Albuquerque Journal or anything. We'll talk about more of these closures as the weeks and months go by. But very difficult to deal with the closures, but also difficult to deal with the closure, the slow opening, the closure again, presumably at some point, hopefully a reopening. But that whipsaw effect can't be fun. And the governor herself has gotten caught up in this, and I put this up on Airs of Enchantment. Now, Michelle Lujan Grisham has multiple Twitter accounts. One of them is her governor account. One of them is more of a campaign account, a little more freewheeling. Michelle 4NM, number 4. This tweet has since been taken down for good reason, but the Republican Party, New Mexico GOP, tweeted on June the 23rd, New Mexico is beating COVID-19. It's time to fully reopen our state. And they link to a Santa Fe, New Mexican piece. The governor says in response, same day, you're welcome, and has a emoji of her painting her toenails or fingernails, which is interesting. Now, she has taken this down, but you get the distinct impression that she's glad to take credit for anything that she thinks is a success, but when it comes to any bad things, any disobedience, anything not working out as well as she would like it, she blames us, the people, our irresponsibility, and she takes it out.
Or Texans.
Or Texans,
yes,
yeah.
I mean, they're always a good target.
Yeah. And
blame a Texan when in doubt. It's always a good New Mexico political ploy.
Yeah, and she takes it out on restaurants especially, or businesses. So it's a very frustrating situation, Wally.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, there is no question this coronavirus is a serious thing. Anytime I hear science and data now, I just roll my eyes because whose science, whose data? Well, because here's the thing. Science is a hypothesis that's tested over time and needs to be replicated by somebody else to move it along. It's not just something you take a look at. There's a lot of conflicting ideas out there about how bad it is, how long it will go on, what's going to happen. And then when it comes down to the policy level, it is a reflection of that huge level of uncertainty. And so I don't know. I want to be careful because a lot of people quote data and they quote unquote science that advocates their position. But there is a lot that's unknown here. Every day goes on, I hear things like, the the protection you receive, the antibodies, they may only last a short period of time, even if you get COVID. But vaccines are the way to go. Well, if antibodies only last a short period of time, why are vaccines going to do any better? So, things just are flying all over the place. And, there are those that would liken this to the 1918 flu. For lots and lots of reasons, it is not. It's a bad thing, but it is also exposing some I don't know, either weaknesses or randomness in terms of what's going on. The great thing about having 50 states is there are a few different plans that can be put forward, but there is nothing perfect. Having said that, there are different approaches, and the one that we're taking in New Mexico might leave us with an economy that may never recover when this virus kind of plays itself out.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of back and forth on Twitter already. Of course, state legislators are prime advocates for one side or the other, and I really haven't seen anyone who's an elected Republican in New Mexico advocating for a lot of what the governor's done or doing, nor have I seen any Democrats elected to the legislature pushing back on what the governor is doing, at least not publicly. So we have these battle lines being drawn. It's not surprising. We've seen increasing partisanship across our country. We're definitely seeing the COVID-19 situation taking on some pretty stark partisan lines. But now the restaurant issue is yet again being painted in a very partisan context. And Liz Thompson, a state representative, Democrat here in Albuquerque, says restaurants who are flaunting their disregard for public health orders, be careful. Your willingness to defy this order raises questions. What other laws you will ignore if you disagree keeping food or hot or cold enough to prevent bacteria, rats, mice, roaches, worker safety, #NMPOL, New Mexico Politics. And that was a tweet just from today. Now, that is both at once an ignorant tweet from just the basic economics perspective, but it really, if you are any small business owner, especially, but not just a restaurant, you have to wonder what Liz Thompson is doing to you or for you, mostly to you, as she works up in Santa Fe, Wally.
Yeah, and that tweet had the implication that the only reason businesses ever do the right thing is because there's a government regulation in play. Right. And if you've been around any industry with any level of regulation, you know that is absolutely, positively not true. So in the restaurant industry, I know that there's all kinds of safety programs. Having your customers get sick is not good for the business plan, no doubt about it. I've gone out to a fair number of restaurants in the past 2 or 3 weeks, seeing the various protocols and approaches. And frankly, Paul, the places I went, I'm not saying every restaurant's doing a great job and they're following the rules. The places I went, without exception, I was impressed with their approach, how clean they were, the separation. Everyone had masks, the paper menus, sanitizing, making it clear what the rules were. And there's a lot of quote unquote, here we go, I'm going to break my own rules. So I'm going to say science and data. So I'll roll my eyes at myself. There are indications in the data that restaurants are not a huge problem with regard to the spread. So what do we have here, and what is the problem? And if there are areas that are a lot of problems, should those be the ones that are worked on? But again, at what level is it appropriate to shut down a business, shut down an industry, and have it actually be a net positive for society and a net positive for the people involved? Yeah. It's an important question.
Well, we know one thing is not an issue, and that's protests. Although the governor, to her credit, did actually say the protest may have had a role. She discouraged them, but early on there was a lot more go out and protest, do what you should do with regard to that issue, not worrying about COVID-19. Restaurants, on the other hand, have been much more put upon by the governor practically than any other industry in the state. And you're right. You're absolutely right. And this is kind of a libertarian talking point and argument all the time. It's evergreen because, yes, there are businesses that may not do the right thing all the time, but if their customers figure it out, and it doesn't take people long to notice if things aren't clean, if things make them sick when they go home. People are uncomfortable with the food that they're putting into their bodies. They are not going to stick around that particular restaurant. Buffets are something that my family has partaken of for many, many moons around Albuquerque. I'll give a shout out to a now deceased departed business, Sweet Tomatoes. And my kids love Sweet Tomatoes. It's a great place as a family, relatively healthy food, a lot of fruits and veggies and that kind of thing. And they did a great job of keeping it clean. But post COVID-19, what will buffets look like? Will buffets come back at all, or how long will that take to happen? It's anybody's guess. But the fact is, if customers are uncomfortable, they won't come to your business. If customers have bad experiences, they won't come back to your business. Heaven forbid you kill one customer. That is basically a death sentence for your business, especially if it's on health-related issues. So the idea that you have these businesses just living on the edge, not concerned about their customers or any health regulations and care is ridiculous. And I think it shows a very deep ignorance of the way businesses actually work and interact with their customers. And that is a much bigger problem when it comes to the public policies coming out of Santa Fe. Because quite honestly, Representative Liz Thompson is a spectator in most respects, as are the other 2.1 or so million New Mexicans. This is the governor, Dr. Scrace, and a tiny cadre of other people making very dramatic decisions for the future of New Mexico because they have been empowered by legislative actors in many years past, 2003 and even further back than that.
Yeah, and a couple of points. If government regulation was always the panacea for any situation, it's not too far to say that, well, then why shouldn't the government just be in charge of everything? Because they have the best possible way to accomplish what we want to accomplish in terms of needing things to go as a society. So that's the first point I would make. And then the second is, businesses, a lot of these businesses that are under now extreme pressure, they're literally fighting for their lives, some of which have been operating decades and even multi-generation for families. And it is one thing to maybe have the type of job where you can work remotely, or have a government job where you call in and do Zoom, versus having a business. And small businesses by their nature have been hurt hugely disproportionately in this, starting from the essential, non-essential, and then just who tends to own smaller restaurants tend to be individuals, small businesses. And so it's one thing to say, oh, yes, safety is the ultimate. But believe me, if your family business employs a lot of people, the safety of those people that are losing their jobs is not something to be overlooked in this. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen. More and more, they're seeing businesses that are certainly not undercapitalized and haven't been successful for a long period of time. And I have a feeling, depending on how many more rounds of open, close that we have, or stay closed for a long time, you're going to see a lot of bankruptcies occur in New Mexico. And then when government revenues fall because restaurants are all out of business and new ones haven't come around to take their place again, and government revenues are down, and state and city employees are having to be furloughed and lose their jobs, then maybe that economics will come full circle. We'll have to see. But right now, it just seems like this whole crisis is just monolithic, as if we could reduce all COVID infections, and we know we could do that, almost get it to zero. It would kill our state, but we know we could do it. And I think the pendulum maybe is still swung a bit too far to that way.
Yeah, well, one more topic to discuss with the governor's latest orders we haven't even mentioned yet, that their mask mandate, or the governor's mask mandate, now is theoretically supposed to apply any public place all the time, including when you're exercising, et cetera, et cetera.
And they had me, I was going to be, Paul, a yes until exercise. I go ride my bike in the bosque where I avoid people. There's not many people. I've been riding in the evening. It's 100 degrees down there, and most people aren't crazy enough to go out when it's still 100 degrees. So I would say my compliance level was extremely high wearing masks, except to exercise where there was an exception. Now I have to think, wow, do I really want to wear a mask to exercise when nobody's around?
Well, Wally, I can say, I'm a person who respects the law in general. I obey the law a vast majority of the time, perhaps with the notable exception of traffic tickets, especially speeding down some of our rural, empty highways.
But you've paid your debt to society, as it were.
But I will say here and now that I am not going to wear a mask when I am walking down the street. I will not wear a mask when I am walking my dogs or exercising outside. I not only, we've talked many times, neither of us are anti-maskers. We wear masks frequently for various reasons, to go into grocery stores, restaurants when they were open until you sit down and actually are eating, and for various other occasions. I do think, especially given the heat situation right now in the middle of summer as we are, it's not good for your body and your health to sit there to exercise with a mask on. It is just not healthy, and I will refuse to do it. So if they want to enter this into the evidence in some future prosecution, so be it. But not get, as the immortal George H.W. Bush said, not gonna do it.
Well, and in the words of the immortal Dr. Seuss, I will not wear it on my bike. I will not wear it on my hike. I will not wear it here and there. I will not wear it anywhere. No, I will wear it anywhere, but I don't want to wear it on a bike or on a hike, particularly when nobody's around.
Exactly. And that is critical. All right. Well, I think we've beat that into a dead horse, but dead pulp.
A dead horse with the mask on.
Yeah. Poor horse. But boy, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, you're talking about pretty, I think, arbitrary rules and regulations that are having profound impacts. And just as an aside here, Wally, when I, got involved in state policy at the Rio Grande Foundation, I knew New Mexico was going to have its challenges and difficulties with the legislature and the kind of the more progressive liberal mindset that's taken hold in this state for many, many moons. But I never thought that moving to a blue state and living in a blue state could have such profound impacts on your personal freedom on a day-to-day basis. Of course, folks can listen to my podcast last week about our travels to Yellowstone. And it's not that Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming are uniformly red states. I know Montana at least has a Democrat in the governor's mansion. But boy, it has, this whole COVID-19 thing has really highlighted the critical importance that executives and executive power at the state level can have. We've talked about executive power, maybe not so much on this podcast, but in general in this country, as presidents have taken on increasing importance relative to the legislative body, Congress, over the years. Now we are seeing governors really feeling their oats and taking on outsized influence. And I think if we had a functional state political process where you had some balancing of powers, not just between the legislative and executive and judicial bodies, but also between the political parties, we might see a little more restraint on the governor's part. But because she knows that the progressives will rubber stamp anything she does, and that's anything she does, we just don't see much accountability from the executive. So it's a systematic governance issue, and this fall election just gets more important based on that kind of question of accountability.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. We've seen a lot of move for a lot of policies that are frankly not good for business and not quote unquote business friendly. And a lot of small businesses have been taking the tack that, well, I don't need to get involved, and that's not going to impact me. I almost said infect me. Freudian slip there. That's not going to impact me. Well, you have to be asleep at the wheel not to realize that, yeah, the government does have a huge role in, quote, the level of freedom that we have to do business in our state. And, will this kind of consolidation or application of power that we're seeing to COVID, will that extend in ever more aspects of business? It's certainly a possibility.
Well, part of it has to do with how long this situation goes on, because there is no check in the legislature or the judiciary, for that matter, in terms of how long we live under these conditions. Basically, the emergency orders under the law can last as long as the governor deems them to, and there seems to be no sign of letting up with regard to her getting power, her taking of power under this crisis, in the name of this crisis. Well, speaking of Governor Lujan Grisham, she had an opinion piece in the Albuquerque Journal on Sunday. New Mexico must keep early childhood momentum going. She talks a lot about several different issues relating to early childhood education. She notes that the Annie E. Casey Foundation recently released their kids count rankings. For the third year in a row, New Mexico ranked last in the nation in child well-being.
So did the governor mean we need to still be negative then, if that's the momentum she's talking about?
Well,
or was she talking about something else?
So the data of that report are from 2018. So I'm sure that everything will be fabulous.
The last 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, so 2018, so she's talking about the last days of the Martinez administration. Interestingly enough, the governor then says those data, those poor outcomes, reflect years of budget cuts for essential early education and human services programs. So, being that we like to actually check facts and figure out what politicians are talking about, we found data from the New Mexico In-Depth website, headlined New Mexico Early Childhood Programs Funding Serving Children 0 to 5, both federal and state funds, 2012 to 2020. By the way, we talk about this issue at some length with Catherine Stevens of the American Enterprise Institute in our weekly podcast this week. So you'll get a lot more information on pre-K and what the state is up to and how they justify what they're trying to do. But we're going to just talk about the specific funding numbers, because remember, the governor just said that the poor performance through 2018 in the kids count report, where we ranked dead last, has to do with our lack of spending on early childhood programs. Now, this is from New Mexico In-Depth. They are not a conservative publication. They are, if anything, a liberal media outlet. 2012, first data they have available, 131.2 million. 2013, 154.9 million. 2014, 163.1 million. 2015 jumped up to 199.4. 2016, 235.9. 2017, 243.3. 2018, 247.9. 2019, 283. 2020, 318.6. So those last two numbers are not included in the Annie Casey report. But going from 2012, 131.2 million to 2018 at 247.9, you're talking about just less than doubling, as at a time when you have, I don't know about the population number, but attendance at our public schools across the state, the number of children around is actually stable or even declining. So the governor's just full of it. That's basically the scientific term for where she's coming from in this particular reporting issue.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem like you can use the old federal budget thing where if you reduce the rate of growth, that's called a cut. This doesn't even seem like that would apply to this these set of numbers. So I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing that you have to say, and then with Catherine Stevens, I was there for the recording of that. You know, the whole issue, which comes up time and time again, is spending and achievement or spending and achieving goals are not always highly correlated in New Mexico
Right.
when it comes to anything related to education, or in this case, early childhood education.
Now, interestingly, we've critiqued it in the past. It's been a while, but the kids count report actually includes the number of 3 and 4-year-olds in pre-K as a variable. Many of their variables do make sense, but I think it's hard to justify. Some of them involve two-parent families or young people not in school and not working, 8th grade proficiency at reading, 4th grade proficiency at reading, family incomes, those kinds of things. A lot of their data is good, but they actually include a variable on the assumption that 3rd and 4th grade or 3 and 4-year-olds being in school is a good thing, when the evidence for that is very questionable and certainly worth looking at. So even based on their own studies with them, the left, because this is a Voices for Children report, putting this information out there, it is very questionable. The governor better hope that something happens next year and next year after that to boost up the kids count report. Although, to be fair, I can't imagine any state, especially a lockdown blue state like ours, where the kids missed out on a third of the school year last year and are very likely to not be going to school, at least not in person, certainly not on a full-time basis, starting this fall. How is that going? Are they going to even measure that in the kids count report? Remember, these reports, all of the reports have issues with the information available, what data we're dealing with. I do think it's a net significant negative, not just in the form of suicides and significant mental health issues, but just learning and personal outcomes, what this lockdown is doing to our children. I don't know if anybody, certainly not any Casey Foundation and Voices for Children, are going to be studying that data. So there's a lot to unpack here, and the governor's just trying to glom on to one thing.
Well, and my thought as you were talking about this is, yeah, almost without question, achievement will go down academically because we haven't been in school. Now, what if it doesn't go down? What does that say? I mean, that's even a worse story there. But I do think that studying the data is not necessarily a bad thing to do with this, but in this hyper politicized environment where we know what we want to have happen and we'll find the data to fit it, it will be interesting to see if they do include that, because I think that showing what happens for interruption of educational processes, that would be something. We've got the data. Why wouldn't we want to study that?
Yeah, and certainly comparing and contrasting what will be a much more robust homeschooling movement in the wake of this whole situation. I don't know. I would expect that the number of homeschoolers in this country or this state to triple, quadruple, or even more. It's going to be a rush to homeschooling. We're still waiting to see exactly what New Mexico's got in store for us. But the other aspect of all that is that as the COVID-19 situation was getting not kind of getting underway, the governor pushed to get the state out from the Yazzie lawsuit, which requires additional K-12 spending for the purpose of making our school system more adequate for all students. So you've got a budget problem at the state level. We all recognize that. We've got the governor pouring $300 million into a new permanent fund for early childhood education, expected to increase that money. And then we have the governor pulling back on trying to get out of a lawsuit to increase K-12 spending, which is a constitutional requirement, whether libertarians and conservatives might think it's being obeyed
abused in the
right.
Yazzie.
So it's just the logical gymnastics and inconsistencies here are marvelous.
Well, when the governor first came into office, she had opportunities to fight the Yazzie lawsuit and chose not to, which I thought at the time, be careful what you wish for. And now, right. What is the saying in Washington? I was for it before I was against it. So
yeah, it's very interesting. And if I'm, we've talked about it, but if I'm the governor, I worry about the adequacy of the financial balance sheets of the state of New Mexico to actually pay for whatever the Yazzie lawsuit and the judges would deem adequate. But if you are concerned about that, as you rightly should be, every policymaker in the state has to be concerned about that lawsuit. And, it is reality that you can tell the judge to jump in a lake. Much like Andrew Jackson did more than 200 years ago, he told the Supreme Court justice, let him enforce his law. And there could be that kind of situation, which would be interesting to see a Democratic governor disregarding judicial fiats to spend more money on the K-12 system. But very, very interesting dynamics. Why is she still spending all this money on pre-K while we have a situation that's unfolding in our public schools that's going to be very, very difficult financially? And speaking of K-12, our Secretary of Education in the state of New Mexico, Ryan Stewart, who I have no personal beef with, we did talk about his decision to keep his child in a Philadelphia school that charges tuition on the order of $35,000 a year. But Ryan Stewart has been working, and this is a June 7th, so it's a month-old journal article, and it's been very underreported that he is actually working in Philadelphia. Now,
socially distancing from New Mexico.
He is really socially distancing. And, I do think what the statement, we're all in this together, right? Well, Secretary Stewart is not all in this together. He does not have a day-to-day understanding of what it really is like here in New Mexico. He's, giving these dictates and statements from afar. His own child is not in a New Mexico public school, let alone a public school anywhere. If Hannah Scandera had done anything like this, the unions and the media would be going bananas. But it's just the signature of the double standard that we have in politics in New Mexico, and especially in this particular area, because the unions do have such a big soapbox upon which to make their points.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Paul. In normal times, I would say this would be so big as to be, just totally untenable, because one of the most advanced management leadership tools from an effectiveness point of view is actually getting out there and seeing what's going on with your own eyes. And obviously he's unable to do that. My question is, with COVID, does it make a big difference because nobody's going out and seeing what's happening with their own eyes? They're just, everybody talks to everybody. So, it's one of those things that I think it's odd at best. I don't think it's appropriate at worst. But Will it make a big difference because we've seen governments have the luxury of not having to go out and do anything? We've seen regulatory agencies say, well, there's COVID, so we're not going to regulate. You tell us, industry, if you're doing okay. So would it make a difference or not? And the fact that it may not make a difference may be the biggest problem and the biggest point of this story is that whether he's here or not, it doesn't matter with regard to education for how things are being run here in New Mexico today.
Yeah, that could be true. And, of course, the political decisions relating to PED are made by the governor and, her close political allies, the teachers' unions, which lead me to another point here, and that is an op-ed that we've been circulating. And basically, I'll explain the concept, which is very simple. We are very much, as the governor stated, and I think she's right, that we're in jeopardy of not having kids go back to school, certainly in early August, as they would be expected. But under this virtual hybrid model, I think we're at least looking to early September beyond Labor Day, where then the kids might go back to some form of school, but still this hybrid model. And it just illustrates that we have this one-size-fits-all system in place, predating, of course, COVID-19 with this bureaucracy. And it needs to be a system that allocates money to the families and the students through them, not through the bureaucracies. And this is a point that we're going to be making at the Rio Grande Foundation increasingly loudly in the months ahead. It doesn't mean that the legislature will act or the governor will act. See previous statement about teachers unions. But the fact is, families are going to be under the gun. Families are going to be responsible and putting in time and resources to educate their own children. They're paying these taxes. Some of that should flow back to them. It doesn't have to be all of it, but some of it should come back to the parents who are now responsible for educating their children.
Yeah, that is a exceptionally good point. And when we were talking about distance learning and distance learning for an 11th grader,
Sure,
I can see that.
I'm on the board of a virtual school.
Yeah.
Of course I get that. Yeah.
What does first grade distance learning even look like as opposed to just being homeschooled with some sort of a program that's brought in?
We don't even have it at the virtual school.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah,
fourth grade, and I think it's very difficult. And I have smaller children in my family, and teaching them and younger kids is not really going to work in a virtual environment at all. The mask thing is just an additional problem. Having kids sit in the classroom for 6-7 hours a day with teachers also in mask theoretically isn't going to work very well. It should, in a just world, it means that parents should get some kind of funding to help them bear the costs of actually educating their kids. Last thing before we go, Wally, the whole merger of UNM and NMSU football programs starting to look better and better each and every day.
Widely panned by the sports media, I might add, but starting to look more realistic.
Saturday, the Journal had an article, no way to make up for $2.7 million if NMSU can't play either payday football game. Long story short, in major college football these days, middle to lower level Division I programs like NMSU Aggies and UNM Lobos get big paydays to go and get trounced by schools like Alabama, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. Because of restrictions now COVID-19 is imposing, they're not having those kinds of games, and so they're going to be huge budget holes. That's in addition to not having fans and all the other issues. So it's a issue to watch and be questioning about, especially when the higher education budget is in such tough shape overall.
Yeah, I call those football games supplying the butt for the butt kicking. That's not going to be there. So,
nope. All right. Well, thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.